In recent years, the debate over climate change seems to have become more and more publicized. Turn on any major news channel on any given day, and you're likely to hear alarming predictions regarding the state of our planet, as well as proposals being discussed in order to curb the so-called effects of climate change. The two opposing sides of the climate change debate are commonly referred to as the consensus, which believes climate change is predominantly caused by human activity and poses an immediate danger, and the minority, which believes that while climate change does exist, it is not caused primarily by human activity, and it is also not any cause for serious concern. Both sides of the debate provide ample arguments and evidence that support their respective views. The first consensus argument that I believe to be the most convincing is that CO2 functions as a greenhouse gas. Now, what this means is that CO2 in our atmosphere has the ability to trap in heat from the sun that would otherwise be radiated out. And this makes sense considering the argument because the human burning of fossil fuels is what releases CO2 into the atmosphere. So it only seems logical to assume that an increase in human activity means more CO2 in the air, which in turn means the Earth's temperature is going to rise. Note that this point explicitly links human production of CO2 to the increase in temperature. The former is directly causing the latter. Historical records illustrate this, showing how temperatures have risen since the beginning of human industrialization. In the same vein, the consensus argues that because CO2 is causing the Earth's temperature to rise, this is fueling an increase in natural disasters. They cite increases in number and severity of wildfires, droughts, hurricanes, tornadoes, and other storms. This is a convincing argument as well because, again, the logic checks out. More heat trapped in the atmosphere means more energy is available for storms to form. More heat would also prolong droughts and make it more difficult for the environments to flourish. Plant growth would be significantly hindered by extreme heat and lack of water. Lastly, the consensus argues that in addition to natural disasters, this increase in global temperatures is also causing a decrease in Arctic sea ice levels, which results in a rise in the ocean levels globally. Now, as the Earth warms, it becomes more and more difficult for the ice to stay frozen. More heat means that more ice is going to melt. And when this ice does melt, the water has to go somewhere. This causes the sea levels globally to rise, which, historically speaking, they have been. This argument is convincing because rising sea levels pose an imminent threat, whereas a general increase in global temperatures may not seem all that bad. Rising sea levels threaten centers of population that are built close to the shore, such as Miami or New York here in the U.S. These cities could become flooded and uninhabitable if the waters rise high enough, and it would displace the millions of people that live there. Now, on the other hand, the minority view argues that while CO2 does possess properties of a greenhouse gas, it seems improbable and unlikely that human-produced CO2 is the main driver of global climate change, when CO2 only makes up 400 parts per million of the entire atmosphere, or 0.04%. That's not a big number. If CO2 is less than half of a percentage point of the entire atmosphere, how then is it possible for it to be the single most influential driving force behind climate change? Why not any of the other gases in the atmosphere? Does water vapor or oxygen or nitrogen affect the global climate? If so, how big of a role does it play? You could insert any other gas into the place of that question and it would still stand. This argument's compelling because it helps to put these concepts into perspective. The climate is enormously complicated. CO2 is only a very, very small piece of that puzzle. The minority also argues that when it comes to CO2 and rising temperatures, correlation does not necessarily equal causation. They point to historical data indicating that global temperatures have often risen before CO2 levels have. Now, if temperatures are increasing prior to an increase in CO2 levels, it's not possible for the rise in temperatures to have been caused by the increase in CO2. Furthermore, CO2 levels of the past have risen and fallen naturally. They do it on their own. They fluctuate, not necessarily as a result of human activity. Levels have clearly fluctuated at points in the past which human activity was very minimally contributing to the CO2 levels at that time because humans weren't industrialized. This argument is convincing because it shows how certain facts can be misrepresented in the grand scheme of the argument. It makes you take a step back and question the consensus narrative that seems to be pushed, for you to accept as common truth. Yes, the temperature rises are associated with rises in CO2, as you can see on the chart, but it might not be in the way that you necessarily assume. Finally, and on that same note, the minority point to the medieval warm period as further proof that climate change is not caused primarily by increases in CO2. Now, the medieval warm period is an era in which global temperatures were at record highs for about 400 years, despite the fact that this was centuries before humans industrialized and started burning fossil fuels on a widespread scale. Much like the last point, the medieval warm period shows that historical records do not exactly illustrate the causal link between human CO2 production and rising temperatures that the consensus frequently cites. The climate change debate is not going away anytime soon. And unfortunately, as the issue becomes more and more politicized, and as individuals become more polarized, it seems less and less likely that anyone on either side is going to be persuaded that their view is incorrect. However, like any other issue, climate change is something that both sides can work together to address. Simple steps like being mindful of your energy consumption and not being wasteful can help to improve our planet for everyone, regardless of whether or not you may agree with the consensus narrative on climate change.